This episode is proudly sponsored by Indigenous Business Australia, who serves, partners and invests with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who want to own their own future.
Black Magic Woman podcast acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this episode on. We also acknowledge traditional owners of the land where you, the listener or viewer, are tuning in from. We would like to pay our respects to our elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was Aboriginal land and always will be Aboriginal land.
Welcome to the Black Magic Woman podcast with Mundanara Bales.
Welcome to another episode of the Indigenous Business Australia Partnership Series, also known as the IBA Partnership with Black Magic Woman. My name is Mundanara Bales and I am the host of this deadly podcast that basically amplifies as many First Nations voices. There are also some non-First Nations peoples that have been on the podcast that are doing some really deadly things across our country. And today is a guest that I have been in awe of for a very long time. I used to listen to you, Annie June, when you used to talk to my late father, Tiger. So I've known who you are since I was a small girl. And I just want to say it is an absolute privilege and an honour to have you as a guest on my podcast. I can't wait for our listeners and also our viewers now on YouTube to be able to hear a bit about your story and the important work that you do, have done, and that you continue to do. So on that note, Annie June, welcome to the Black Magic Woman podcast.
Thank you, Mundanara. Talunguru Maningari. Good morning in Bunuba, my first language. And can I say it's an absolute honour to be speaking with you as a fine young woman now and following in that footsteps of your father, who was one of our big heroes in this sector and in, you know, his leadership in this country for us.
Thank you, Aunt. Well, for our listeners, for those in particular that don't know you, Auntie June, or don't know your story, can you please share with us, you know, your country and a little bit about where you grew up?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I'm from the Kimberley region, central Kimberley, little place called Fitzroy Crossing. 4,500 people, 5 language groups there: Walmajeri, Wangajunga, Kuniandi, Nyigina, and Bunuba. And Fitzroy Crossing sits at the southernmost corner of Bunuba country. And it's the home of the Dangu Warawara people and their families who live in Fitzroy, in surrounding communities and across Australia. And so we're privileged to be living in a town of, you know, on Dangu Warawara country. I was born in Fitzroy Crossing at the old AIM hospital, which is on the banks of the Fitzroy River, just a stone throw away from the old crossing, which is now being repaired and reconstructed for people to get to the east side of the river, because the big new flash bridge that we had was ripped apart by the recent flooding there. So, you know, I was born in Fitzroy well before the 67 referendum, returned to the cattle station of Brooking Springs with my mother, and later taken into Fitzroy Crossing and to the old police station by my biological father, who felt it was far safer for my mother and I to be there and to seek refuge at the trackers camp, where many of our family members worked as police trackers and lived not far from the police station. And then later my mother and I moved to the mission, and Mum worked there at the mission superintendent's house, and I remember my earliest memories back to 3 years of age, living on the mission, and then returning to another pastoral property on Bunuba country, Leopold Downs, where my grandmother was at the time. So my mother returned to her when I was about 3 from the mission, feeling probably a lot safer now to return to family. So I have some really clear memories of my early childhood growing up on Leopold Downs. Yarangi is the name from Bunuba of that area. There's a beautiful spring. There's limestone ranges, the Balili, the old Devonian reef that runs through the country, and I felt happy and safe growing up there. As little kids, we would create our own adventures and fun, and toys were limited, so we made our own toys from mud and sticks and whatever else, and we learnt about country and learnt about who we were as Bunuba people, what were the names of places, what were the protocols we had to follow, and, guide us through our relationships with each other, who our families were, listening to all of that knowledge in Bunuba. So Bunuba was my first language, or is my first language, and all of that had informed me into, who I've become. Grounded in culture, language, Indigenous knowledge, Bunuba knowledge, and the protocols that exist that I still follow today around interactions with those that I'm in contact with, other Aboriginal people, and coming from a place of respect, we engage with each other. And we're guided continuously by the rules set for us from the beginning of time. This is how I believe our people survived and had healthy societies, because everyone followed those rules and showed respect and helped to be there to support each other. And they're good rules that, can help us navigate and survive in this new reality, even more so.
Well, those rules, Auntie, were like ensured stability and efficiency in our society.
That's right. It enabled those key things, and it enabled that the energy and our focus were on real things that kept us safe and healthy and in balance in our relationships with each other. Look, I'm not saying that everything was perfect, but I think there were less opportunity for some of the issues and matters that we're dealing with today in terms of relationships with each other. I think, with the majority of groups and individuals observing these protocols, there were more opportunity for, positive interactions and enjoyment and a more balanced and harmonious lifestyle and way of living. And in Bunuba country, we have, the Devonian reef, which we call Balili, and that Balili country has different names. There's many living areas within those that range system. They're full of artwork. They're full of evidence of our prior occupation. There's stones, big rocks where tools were sharpened, where fires were lit to cook food, and we've done heaps of carbon dating with the rock art there with archaeologists and others, and evidence shows our occupation of that country for 90,000 years in some sites, and over 47,000 years in some others, and the rock art has been there for just as long, and country needs to be protected and visited, and all of that deep history of our presence and our occupation of place is so important, and the teachings and intergenerational knowledge transmission is so critical for our people.
Annie June, I have been privileged to work with my elders. Auntie Lililwan is my grandmother's sister, and I know you know Annie Mary Graham as well. Oh. Annie Mary and Annie Lilla and Uncle Charlie are the elders at Black Card. That's the organisation I founded with them, and for the last 10 years we have been educating. We have had over 20,000 participants participate in Black Card training, and it's not cultural awareness training. I have to keep on reinforcing this to people that inquire about cultural awareness. The training that we deliver, we educate people about Aboriginal terms of reference, and we're educating people about the accumulated knowledge that either developed or evolved over the tens of thousands of years that our people have lived in this country. So when we talk about governance and identity, community, country, and elders, just to name a few, we're talking about what does that mean in our terms, not in white terms of reference, because when we're talking about some of the things today where, when we talk about land, for white fellas, they see it as a piece of real estate that could be bought or sold, but in Aboriginal terms, it could never be bought or sold. You could never own land. So we break down the difference and try and really educate people about the sophisticated society that we were running without any outside interference. So we have to keep reminding people that we are owners and runners of country, and it wasn't that long ago that Aboriginal people were running an entire country without ever invading people. And we had no police, we had no prisons, we had no need for armies, and yet they referred to us as uncivilized or cannibals or savages or primitive, or this anthropological definition that's still in place today that we were hunters and gatherers struggling to survive in a harsh, cruel world. We can, within 60 seconds, easily basically debunk all of that to prove that we had a civilizational culture in this country. And even though we didn't invent any monumental architecture like the Great Wall of China and the pyramids in Africa, we invented a monumental system of how to run a country. We invented a monumental governance system. And I love unpacking that with people because straight away it's a strength-based approach. It's not the deficit model. Oh, poor black fellas, this is what's happened to us and this is what we're struggling with. We're not all victims and we don't all need help. We have to remind ourselves as black fellas that it wasn't that long ago that we were running this country. So I love every day waking up to go to work and delivering the Black Card training. The elders have passed on that knowledge to us and the other facilitators at Black Card. And it's a strength-based approach in everything because we are operating on Aboriginal terms of reference. And that's really important to us at Black Card and really important to the elders that we're educating mainstream Australians about the tens of thousands of years of history and heritage that belongs to this country and how they too can take on some of those obligations to care for country. When you work with a lot of non-Aboriginal people, and I've heard you a lot of times sharing with them your language, where you come from and the importance of that, what do you share with some, especially because people are listening to this podcast that are non-Aboriginal people? Some may not know the history of this country, but what's some of the most important things that you talk to non-Aboriginal people about so that we can have better relationships and better outcomes when we do interact and engage with each other?
Oh, look, all very important points you raise here. I think people often need to be reminded just how privileged they are to be in the presence of the members of our traditional nations from this country, from this continent, and listening and being privileged in being shared knowledge that stems from time immemorial, that this is knowledge held by the world's oldest continuous civilization on Earth. Now, pause for a moment and just take that in. How privileged one is to be in the company of people who hold that knowledge and is sharing that knowledge with you. I feel privileged when I'm listening to you or other people from different traditional nations in this country, getting to hear firsthand from people from country long way from where I live and country that I know. I find that really amazing and absolutely privileging for me to expand my understanding of people's and the way they operate, what's important. And there's so many commonalities that we share as Indigenous folk on this continent. And I think also there's many things that we share with other Indigenous people in the world, common understandings. We might do it a bit differently. We might call it something different in our first languages. Mm-hmm. But there's something that's common and uniting for us. And we feel that. Feeling has a lot to do with it. So we ask people to stop speaking and to listen deeply and to feel those words. Feel and allow yourself to have that deep experience. Often it's of additional impact, if you like, if you take people out on country. So they can hear the sounds, they can feel themselves in that space. And when I deliver, teachings or lessons, stories, understandings around cultural intelligence, not cultural awareness. Awareness is part of that, but it's around gathering the intelligence of that place, that space, the people, the present, the history, and listening to our aspirations for the future. I know, like you, that there's so many people hungry to get better understandings. People are often distracted by some of the surface stuff, and sometimes it's just so superficial. It's deficit, like you said earlier. It's framing us in the deficit. The issues are issues that we're grappling with on a daily basis, created by institutions and systems that were very foreign to how we held communities together, or our ancestors did, our forefathers did, and our mothers and grandmothers. So we get distracted in this contemporary world with all of those contemporary issues, and we get blamed for being the creators of those issues. And there's so many people that get confused about that. But if we start off with informing and sharing and helping people to open themselves up to wanting to be informed and wanting to understand, so that with that understanding they can help, because I believe there's so many people out there, our non-Indigenous people, that do want to help. And I think those who want to be obstructionists and create, chaos and confusion, they're in the minority, because there's so many decent people out there. And we've got to stay focused. I know we've been so generous in opening our hearts and minds, in sharing our stories. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Some people don't want to do that. They want to keep that private, and that's fine. But to create understanding, we have to create that space to share some of that knowledge. And if people are wanting to continue to learn, well, they will commit to a longer process of staying connected with us and being on this journey with us, not just as a one-off, but for their entire lives, because this is the reality we're living in. We're juggling protecting country, like you say, looking after societies of people, generations of people, ensuring their safety and protection and their rights and interests are protected. And we're also wanting to be smart operators in this modern world that is complex, that we must navigate. And we've been the best people at that. We've adapted to seasons changing, over the history of our occupation of this country, our care for this country, our obligation as the human population to our non-human relatives, to the spirits of our ancestors that have passed on, the way we continue to communicate with them, because they're ever present. That just because they've left this side of Earth doesn't mean that they're gone from us forever. They are with us all the time. And, we believe that, and we must conduct different rituals, processes to let them know that they're with us, and we remember, and we call on them, we speak to them, we communicate with them. And some of these practices are so different from the world of non-Indigenous people. There are those that have, worked in anthropology and other sectors where they've engaged and been embraced into our societies. They're non-Indigenous people that we've adopted ourselves into our families, and we, help them understand so that they can step out in the big world with that knowing and be, advocates and supporters for us.
As the Social Justice Commissioner for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, you've extended that for the next 2 years, so you're still going to be doing some much needed work. And I know that for the very first time I'll get to be at the Wianiutagani Summit for First Nations women and girls on Ngunnawal Ngambri country. There is an opportunity for us, especially as First Nations women and young girls, to be there and to be able to listen to the stories and to be able to connect with other, especially First Nations women and girls from right across this country. Can you share with us a little bit about what this conference, the summit's going to be about?
Yes, thank you. Now, that's a, huge huge event, huge gathering. It's the first time the gathering has been held in the history of this country that's dedicated to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and girls from across the country. Since how it began is since I stepped into the role of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner, I was the first Aboriginal woman into the role in 25 years. We had some incredible men from our mob in this role, but I thought it was so important to mark that occasion with bringing along the voices of all First Nations women and girls into the human rights space, connecting those communities and through those individuals to the Australian Human Rights Commission. And so the people understood what the Human Rights Commission, the Australian Human Rights Commission, its role, its function, and how to access it. And for the Human Rights Commission to be able to have that strong link to community. And I say that because I'm a community worker. I worked in the language, law and culture, land council, community development area, women's advocacy. So that's the history of where I've come from in terms of my focus in my career. And I appreciate how important it is to be able to have access to people of influence and those who are sitting far away from our communities and making decisions based on policies designed within these systems and institutions for our benefit, and how often policy is not able to hit the target and to empower and strengthen us in the many challenges that we're wanting to address and be drivers of change of. So I thought it was so important when I engaged with over 2,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women in the first year of in this role in 2017 and 18. And I travelled to every state and territory, to regional centres, to city communities, to women's prisons, to youth detention centres, to remote communities and very remote communities. And I didn't go there with a set agenda to limit our discussions around certain topics that I was interested in. I left it open for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and girls to talk to me about things they wanted me to know about and how I could bring their voices into the first big report tabled in Federal Parliament in December 2020 of their voices on the issues that mattered for them and their achievements in these spaces, the challenges that exist for them, and areas where they identified clearly where they want change and how they want to be the agents of change and to be empowered and have self-determination. So I took a very strong human rights-based approach in the engagements, in the pulling together of these voices, based, on their voice. And so this commitment I gave in the engagements when women said, we want to be able to speak to these people that make decisions about our lives on all of these fronts, on all of these issues, which then, really signal for me that I must bring women and girls, young women, together with policymakers, with people who are, decision makers in corporate Australia, in the government agencies, within the Parliament. And that's what's going to happen between the 9th to the 11th with all women, but preceding that, we will have a young women's forum being facilitated by deadly Indigenous youth doing good, empowering young women to facilitate and moderate those discussions. And on that note, I want to acknowledge the huge support of Indigenous Business Australia for supporting women from across the country, women and young women, to come to the summit. Kia Dowell and Stella DeCos, they've been fantastic women to work with. Kia Dowell has been on the advisory board to this project over the last 5 years, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be working with her and the many other women across the country through their organisations, through their community groups, and as individuals. And this is a time where all of those incredible people are coming together in Canberra, in Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, listening to the wonderful Matilda House, who will welcome us all. And we've got, fantastic speakers lined up, presenters, where we can listen to each other. And this is a space I've made available by inviting Indigenous women and non-Indigenous women. Indigenous women sit in policy design and work in these systems and institutions, so do non-Indigenous women. And so bringing them together with community women and young women is really important, that we hear each other. The space is based on respect for each other, following our protocols that exist in our societies, and honouring our first mothers and grandmothers, and, learning from each other and creating some very strong networks in addition to those that exist already between us, strengthening those networks and connections so that we can continue to walk forward together as the first women of this country. Following in the footsteps of our matriarchs, whose digging sticks turned the soil of this country, kept it fertile, kept it plentiful in terms of food for our sustenance and for our non-human relatives that we rely on. That, it's incredible that we come from a place where we're a part of a bigger ecosystem, and we have a role to play, and we keep that balance. So we share that knowledge, we live in that belief, and we want that thinking to be able to shape how we make decisions about the things that we know are important, and decisions that are right and good and respectful.
Wow. Annie June, the shivers, the hair of my body when you started talking about the digging sticks that have been turning the soil. I could feel the strength of my ancestors, of my old people, as you were talking, and that feeling that I'm sure that non-Indigenous women are going to feel when they're amongst women like you and all of the other deadly Black women in our country that will be at this summit. So I cannot wait to be there myself. I just want to say, Aunt, there is so much next time that if I can get you maybe on Ngunnawal country, we can sit together and yarn for a bit longer. I want to talk about the history of Fitzroy. I want to talk about the work that you've done with fetal alcohol syndrome. But I know I got to let you go. You are a very busy woman. Annie June, I am so grateful that when we were in Garma last year, that we were going to try and line up that yarn, but everybody was around you. And then I found you in that women's space, and I knew it wasn't the right time to kind of put pressure on you. But I gifted your granddaughter a Black Magic Woman bag, and you went, where did you get that from?
I know.
So big shout out to your granddaughter, who is going to be, I know, at Ngunnawal will be at the summit, so I'm going to catch up with her and get her on the podcast. But I just want to say, Art, I know that our guests, our listeners, our viewers have been treated to be able to hear your stories and some of the work that you've been doing. The Wiyani Uthagani report will be in our show notes, and I will also put some other links, especially to the summit, so that people can keep up with some of the work that you're doing as our Social Justice Commissioner. So thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure once again, and I can't wait for us to catch up and maybe do a, what did you call it? Episode 2, part 2 interview, Jan, next time.
Yes, for sure. And thank you for the opportunity. You're just so deadly yourself. And look, I'm happy to keep this connection and other sessions going, series of how we travel through country and we share knowledge and we strengthen and acknowledge the incredible resilience and achievements of First Nations women wherever we are, and that we can make room for others. And like you say, on our terms, we set the boundaries, we design how and what it is we share, and that we strengthen our connection in this shared space that our country has become. Mm-hmm. We share this space with so many people who've come from countries far away, but for us to, remind them that we're still here, we're still maintaining our customs and tradition, and we want healthy societies, but, we have a heart and we can embrace others, and we have embraced others, and we want them to respect us too.
And in the language that my great-great-great-great-grandmother, she spoke the Darug language of the Sydney area. Yano Yano means I'll see you again. So I just felt being able to even speak the language that my ancestors once spoke is an absolute privilege. And I love the fact that you still speak your first language. I've heard you open up conferences for the first 5 minutes in Bunuba language, and it just makes me feel really proud as a Black woman to see you up there as the Social Justice Commissioner, speaking your language and then doing the English a little bit later. So Yano Yano in the Darug language basically means I'll see you again. So it's not goodbye, but I'll see you soon.
Okay, well, Yaninja, I'll see you later.
If you'd like any more info on today's guest, please visit our show notes in the episode description. A big shout out to all you Deadly Mob and allies who continue to listen, watch and support our podcast. Your feedback means the world. You can rate and review the podcast on Apple and Spotify, or even head to our socials and YouTube channel and drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. The Black Magic Woman podcast is produced by Clint Curtis.
This episode is proudly sponsored by Indigenous Business Australia, who serves, partners and invests with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who want to own their own future.